Episode 103, The Tartaria Theory. Was there a hidden global civilization wiped from history? Welcome back to the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. Look closely at the grandest buildings of the 19th century, the ornate train stations, the World's Fair pavilions, the elaborate civic buildings that still stand in cities across Europe, Russia, and America. Now look at maps from the 16th and 17th centuries, when cartographers from Portugal to England labeled vast stretches of Asia and Siberia with a single name, Tartaria. And then ask why that name disappeared. The Tartaria theory, one of the fastest growing and most visually compelling conspiracy theories of the past 5 years, holds that these two observations are connected. That Tartaria was not merely a geographic label for poorly understood lands, as historians maintain, but a single, technologically advanced global empire. That it possessed free energy, wireless technology, and architectural capabilities far beyond anything history credits to the 19th century. And that it was deliberately erased, wiped from the maps, scrubbed from the history books, and buried, quite literally, under a layer of mud. Tonight we examine the Tartaria theory, its origins, its evidence, and what it reveals about the way we construct and contest the past. Detailed explanation. Tartary, or Tartaria, was a real geographic term. From the 15th century through to the late 18th century, European and Russian cartographers used it to describe the vast lands of Central Asia, Siberia, Mongolia, and parts of China, regions they understood poorly and associated with the Turkic and Mongol peoples they call Tartars. Maps from this period label sections of Asia as Chinese Tartaria, Muscovite Tartaria, and independent Tartaria. The term appeared in atlases, encyclopedias, and travel accounts for 3 centuries. By the 19th century, the term had largely disappeared from maps, replaced by more precise geographic and political designations as European powers developed better knowledge of the regions involved. This is the mainstream historical explanation, straightforward cartographic evolution as geographical knowledge improved. The conspiracy theory begins here and diverges sharply. Believers argue that Tartaria was not a vague geographic label, but a unified empire of extraordinary sophistication, with a global reach and a technology base far in advance of what Orthodox history attributes to the era. They argue that the World's Fairs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, events that produced breathtakingly ornate temporary buildings in cities like Chicago, Paris, and St. Louis, were not built by the host nations at all, but were in fact remnants or imitations of Tartarian architecture. The destruction of this empire, believers argue, was accomplished through a series of catastrophic mud floods, events that buried entire cities, reset the global population, and allowed a new ruling class to erase the evidence and rewrite history from scratch. Core elements of the theory. The first element is the architectural evidence. Believers point to 19th century buildings, particularly World's Fair structures and ornate civic buildings, whose complexity and scale they argue could not have been built by the societies credited with constructing them. The temporary exhibition halls of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, for example, were built at extraordinary speed and demolished afterward. Why, believers ask, would such magnificent structures be demolished? The answer in the theory's framework is that they were not built for the fair. They were pre-existing Tartarian structures that were repurposed for the event and then demolished to conceal their origin. The second element is the mud flood evidence. Conspiracy researchers have photographed buildings across the world whose ground floor windows, doors, and archways sit several feet below the current street level, as though the ground has risen around them. This observation, which has a conventional explanation in urban development and ground accumulation over centuries, is interpreted as physical evidence of a mud flood event that buried the lower levels of Tartarian buildings. The current inhabitants of these cities, in this reading, are occupying the upper floors of structures whose true scale lies underground. The third element is the orphan trains, a real historical program in 19th century America, in which orphaned and homeless children from cities were transported by train to rural families, is cited in the theory as evidence of post-flood repopulation. The argument is that the mud flood killed most of the population, and that the orphan trains were part of a coordinated effort to repopulate regions where everyone had died. The actual historical context for the orphan trains, urban poverty, child welfare reform, and the demand for agricultural labor is acknowledged but set aside. The fourth element is the free energy suppression. Nikola Tesla is a recurring figure in the Tartaria theory. Believers argue that Tesla's wireless energy transmission work was not an invention, but a rediscovery of Tartarian technology, and that it was suppressed by financial interests for the same reason that Tartaria itself was erased, to maintain control over energy resources and prevent the population from accessing the free energy that a previous civilization had mastered. Evidence for and against the mainstream historical evidence against the Tartaria theory is comprehensive. Tartaria as a geographic label is well documented in the cartographic record. The maps that believers cite as evidence of an empire are understood by historians as imprecise designations for regions European cartographers knew little about. The gradual disappearance of the term reflects the growth of geographical knowledge, not the erasure of a civilization. The World's Fair buildings were built by known contractors using documented construction methods. Their demolition was practical. They were temporary exhibition structures built cheaply from wood and plaster specifically to be dismantled. Their ornate appearance reflects the architectural fashions of the Beaux-Arts period, not alien or Tartarian origin. The construction is documented in extensive archival records, photographs, and contemporary accounts. The sunken windows and doorways in old buildings have documented explanations. Urban ground levels rise naturally over centuries as debris, paving, and infrastructure accumulate. This is visible in archaeological sites across the world and requires no mud flood to explain. The theory's origin has been traced in part to pseudoscientific Russian nationalist sources that emerged in the 1990s and spread through internet communities from there. Bloomberg writer Zach Mortis described it as the QAnon of architecture, a theory that reflects cultural discontent with modernism and a romantic belief that traditional architectural styles are inherently superior, wrapped in a conspiratorial framework. Arguments in favor believers argue that the convergence of evidence, the maps, the architecture, the sunken buildings, the orphan trains, the Tesla connection, points toward something that conventional history cannot explain through coincidence alone. They note that history is written by those who survived and those who won, and that the erasure of inconvenient civilizations from the historical record has happened before. Göbekli Tepe was unknown to mainstream archaeology until its excavation, and entire Bronze Age civilizations have been lost and rediscovered. They also argue that the speed with which the theory is dismissed, the labels of pseudoscience and conspiracy rather than engagement with specific architectural anomalies, reflects institutional resistance to challenges to the established historical narrative. Arguments against historians argue that the theory's specific architectural claims do not hold up to examination. The World's Fair buildings are exhaustively documented. The sunken windows are explained by well-understood urban geology. The maps show geographical labels, not political entities with defined borders. The orphan trains have documented causes that predate any proposed mud flood by decades. More broadly, the theory requires a global catastrophe of sufficient scale to bury cities and reset the human population occurring approximately 100 years ago, an event that would have been witnessed, documented, and remembered by millions of people alive at the time. No such event is recorded in any independent historical source from any culture on Earth. Public opinion and broader impact, the Tartaria theory, is one of the most visually compelling and rapidly spreading conspiracy theories of the current era. Its strength lies in images, photographs of ornate buildings, maps with the word Tartaria printed across vast territories, side-by-side comparisons of architectural styles that feel like evidence even when they are not. On platforms built around visual content, it spreads with extraordinary ease. Scholars of conspiracy theory have noted that Tartaria reflects something real about how people feel about the present, a sense that the world we inherited is impoverished compared to what came before, that something magnificent was lost, and that those in power have reasons to keep us from knowing about it. Whether or not the theory is true, the emotion it taps is genuine. Conclusion: was there a hidden global civilization wiped from history? The historical evidence says no. Tartaria was a geographical label. The World's Fair buildings were built by known contractors, and the sunken doorways have conventional geological explanations. For believers, the convergence of maps, architecture, and suppressed technology points towards something that orthodox history refuses to examine. For historians, the theory mistakes genuine architectural grandeur, imprecise cartography, and normal urban geology for evidence of a lost empire. What is certain is this: the past is genuinely incomplete. Civilizations have been lost and found. And the human desire to believe that something magnificent came before us and was taken away is one of the oldest impulses in the human story. This is the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. If tonight's episode made you think, please rate and follow on Spotify. Tomorrow on the Conspiracy Theory Analyst, did Elvis Presley fake his own death? That's next.